Good afternoon, Woodland Ponders. I'm Al Chasen, co-chair of ArtScope, and this is another one in the series of interview slash conversations I'm having with other members of ArtScope and those who are within the overall Woodland Pond creative community. Just wanted to say hello to Irene Fitzgerald, our other co-chair, and Marcy Woodruff, one of the early members of ArtScope, both of whom are recovering in the health center. Hi, girls. um, today I'll be having a conversation with Lionel Heyman. Lionel and his wife, Tamar Upler, have been living at Woodland Pond for more than a year. 2 weeks ago, we heard from Tamar, so Lionel, giving you equal time is only fair. Most of us who know you are aware that you spend a lot of time in the wood shop, and that now houses a lot of the equipment that you brought with you. I've seen you there making picture frames and wood bowls that you turn on the lathe that you brought with you. And let me say, Lionel, you're very, very generous with your time, and you're willing to teach some of us how to operate the equipment, especially some of us who are very fearful of the power tools. But there's another creative side of you that most Woodland Ponders don't know about, and that's the ceramics you've created. You told me about your years in the New York school system, teaching students how to work with their hands, and what did that entail?
Well, 30 years of teaching pottery in middle school and some adult ed at George Washington High School. And it was a really wonderful experience. The last 20 years. The first 10 years were horrible.
Was it just ceramics or?
No, it was just ceramics.
Just ceramics, yeah. Okay. You brought several examples of your ceramics here today, and would you tell us about them?
Well, over a 35-year period of time, because you got to count my time in college, I discovered pottery, and it was like amazing, just absolutely this wonderful experience. And so I brought some pieces that have the gamut of the chronological time, the early ones and the later ones, and different categories, from like the one on the table here was one of the early ones, and this was from about 1958 or so, when this was the style, and one tried to attain this sort of these shapes, and it was fun, and then you grew from there. Oh, let me put this away, to the more utilitarian pieces. Where you'd make covered bowls and have on the cover itself, and it was just craft. You learned your skills and you made things, and then when I was on sabbatical, just before I retired, I had a wonderful experience with a teacher at the college here in New Paltz, and I could throw a pot, and I could have a cover fitting the pot, and it was easy. It was no problem. And my teacher at the first critique said, "Now do something. You have the craft. You know how to do with your hands. Now do something. Be creative in some way." And somebody had given me a videotape of the old Flash Gordon serials
Mhm.
where these guys were these elaborate helmets with wings coming out. And so I was pretty influenced by that. And here we have an example of, that type of uh, just throwing a bowl, just playing with it, carving it up, adding a base, and
Yeah. I find the bass very interesting.
adding a base. And it was just fun. And you just let yourself go and you evolve from pottery as a craft to sculpture
Mhm.
that you're using your skill because all you have Nope.
Mhm.
In order to take the image that you have in your head, the creative part of you, and put it into a concrete form, into a shape, you have to be able to control it. Your craft is essential, whether it's painting or pottery or sculpture. You have to be able to take the image in your head and through your hands express that image. And it took me 40 years to get to that
Mhm.
point, but it was an amazing breakthrough when it happened.
Did you do all of these in school, or did you have a wheel at home, or?
No, this was all in school. See, that's the greatest. Well, this was the last, these pieces here were done at my last sabbatical here before I retired. The first piece I showed was one of the first pieces I made early at CCMY in the art
Mhm.
department. And then I can't reach the floor. And, and here's one of my favorite pieces, which I made into a wall hanging. Yeah, I made this into a wall hanging. And again, just carving up and adding elements and playing. And it's okay to play. The Japanese, the venerable old potter, is the only one who's allowed to do raku.
Mhm.
Because raku, you never really know what's going to happen. And he has already proven that he has the skills and therefore he can have the freedom to play.
Is this a Reku?
No, no, no,
That's
no.
a fascinating glaze.
Okay,
it's got on
that's Gelada. And my teacher thought that the shapes were the important thing and not to distract from the shapes with the glaze. And I think she was right.
Mhm.
And so this one and this one really were, that, uh, and terra sigillata is like an old Roman technique where you take clay and dilute it in water and make it into a liquid called slip. And then you take that slip and you keep straining it and straining it and straining it, adding water and straining it and straining it until you get infinitesimal particles of clay, which you then spray on or paint on and then fire it. And it acts as a
I
glaze.
see.
And by getting the black, you just add cobalt oxide, in, I think 4% or something.
When you were making your pots, was it your intention to sell them, or did you just
No.
keep them to admire and encourage you to progress as a potter?
They were, what I was teaching, and and I was having fun, and I was taking courses, but you know, trying to sell the stuff and make a living, forget it. You know, you're not gonna, you're never gonna make a living at it.
Mhm.
I mean, one or two people, three or four doesn't, you know, make a good living. But other than that, production part, you got to be a production partner.
Mhm.
You can't take the time to play and you know, and add the elements and carve it up, and
Right.
you know, so you know, they used it. They gave them as gifts to people. You know, you threw away stuff because as you progressed, you look back at your previous work and said, "What kind of garbage is that?" You know, and I think it's very important to be able to do that,
Mhm.
to not be in love with your work because it's yours. You know,
Yeah.
you have to be able to look at it objectively and say, I'm growing, I'm now better. And the stuff that was before was really embarrassing
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah. I know you told me you've been disappointed that the ceramics area in the art studio is not used as much as it should be. For some of us at Woodland Pond, throwing pots on a wheel is a little difficult given carpal tunnel syndrome, arthritis. Um, can you tell our residents how they might make better use of the ceramics area, for example, with slabs or coils?
Well, when I was teaching middle school, there were wheels, which were not very good ones, which I immediately took out and put in storage. And we worked with slabs and coils. And it's really a lot of fun. And you don't have to have the creative spark that the artist had. You can turn out nice things
Mhm.
that are pleasant, that are pretty, that are well made, that have decent, you know, look decent without being an artist. And of course, time. You know, you don't want to spend 2 hours cleaning for a half hour's work.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
and the situation here is that the ceramics area that's set aside is shared with the sewing and cloth area. And cloth and clay do not mix well because no matter how much you clean after your work, you're going to have dust, you're going to have
Mhm.
dirt, and it's just, you can't, you know, you just can't do it.
Can't avoid it. Yeah.
And there's, unfortunately, there's a limited amount of space. And I have some ideas of how we can do something. And perhaps after this epidemic is through and we're back to normal, we'll be able to do something outdoors,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. If there's an interest, would you be willing to teach
Oh,
a
I would
class?
love to. I would love
Mhm.
to.
Mhm. Okay.
But, you know, I would say to people, if you're coming in to just play with clay, go come in with clay. You don't need me and don't waste my time. If you want to really learn something, fine.
Mhm.
Because I really feel that ceramics or any craft, you have to develop skills. And developing the skills can either take a long time, like throwing on a wheel, or you could develop skills very fast with slabs and coils because it's all, there are lots of little tricks
Mhm.
that you can do to make things really, like I told the kids, you know, if you do a circle, it has to be perfect.
Mhm.
If you do a square, it has to be perfect. But if you do a triangle, it doesn't have to be perfect. The sides can be different sizes, you know? And, you know, and so you want to go do something that's going to give you satisfaction. At the same time, I'm a pretty demanding person as far as I won't allow my students
Mhm.
to produce garbage, you know, and and it's worked, you know, it really worked.
Yeah.
You know, I tell the kids the first day of class, I say, look, I'm going to show you things, and you're going to make things, and you're going to take them home. And your mother, because she loves you, is going to say, oh, they're gorgeous. And she's going to put it in the living room, but she's not going to take it away in a week, and you'll never see it again.
Mhm.
Because she really will think it's good, not because her loving child made it, but because it is. And I think it's very important to separate your work from yourself.
Mhm.
You know that, and I have a definition of art.
Let me ask you, did, did it take you a long time to learn to throw a pot?
Yeah, yeah. It took me, and then all of a sudden, I had the right teacher who said, "Well, if you're going to make a bowl, you're going to throw a low cylinder but very wide, and then you're going to open it up. And if you do a tall vase, you're going to do a narrow cylinder and pull it up.
Mhm.
You know, and then all of a sudden, it made so much sense. And I mean, it's that type of thing, but you have to be able to develop the feeling because it's all feel. If you're a painter or a sculptor or a wood carver, there are tools between you and your material. If you're working with clay on a wheel, especially, there's you and the clay,
Mhm.
and it's your fingers. It may be a sponge, you
Yeah.
know, and so you have this very intimate contact with the material, which with no other craft, no other art form do you have.
Mhm.
You know, this you and it without a paintbrush.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you've got a student that comes up to you, let's say he or she's pretty good at what they're doing, and says, "I'd like to become a full-time potter." What advice do you give them, knowing, you know, earning a living, the cost of space, the family, et cetera, et
I would
cetera?
say, unfortunately, I would say become a school teacher.
Right.
Become a school teacher.
Yes.
Unfortunately, New York City in the last 15 and last 30 years has gotten rid of so many studios, you know, for economic reasons. And they just, so you don't have the opportunity that I had, where New York City provided me with all this equipment, all this space that I could then do my stuff and have fun at doing it. I mean, but I would say trying to make a living at this is not easy.
Yeah. 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 Since it's a conversation, let me bring up something of a personal nature. Um, Back around 1968 or so, Sylvia and I attended a crafts show up at Bear Mountain. And one of the spaces there was occupied by a potter. And I stood there, I was mesmerized by what he was doing. I could swear I got clay on me from the pot that he was throwing. And for 2 years, I kept thinking about it. And then business really turned lousy. And I said, okay. And I didn't say okay, but Sylvia said, you know, like, stop moping around. Why don't you go take lessons from somebody in town who is a potter? Guy lived near me. I said, okay. So I went and I started taking lessons, and I bought a wheel. It took two of us to carry it down into the basement. That's how heavy it was. And it fascinated me. I really was hooked on it. And then business improved and the wheel didn't see me anymore. Okay. But the potter I was taking lessons from, who was now a professional potter, okay, unfortunately had to sell what he was producing. And he wasn't very good at being a salesman, although his work was very saleable. And it got to the point where the real estate authorities were after him constantly for non-payment of taxes. And he finally said, I'm leaving, I'm leaving New York. And he did. And I think he ended up in North Carolina. So every so often I think, well, what would have happened if business didn't improve? Because I said, I'm going to give myself 10 years, okay, from 40 to 50 to become a potter, which is a little old, I think. So fortunately, I never really had to face that choice. But, I can understand the whole financial aspect of it. And you also have to be married to somebody who will give you also financial and spiritual and emotional support. Not easy to find.
Well, also inherit some money.
Well, inheriting money never hurts. um, I've been reading the differences between art and craft, and there are definitions that come up. And what's interesting is you used the word creative a little while ago in discussing the whole issue. And in none of the definitions that I read was the word creative associated with craft, which really stunned me. It
Well,
was more learning how to use the tools.
look, you have in your head an image, and then you want to take that image and put it into immaterial form.
Mhm.
Because nobody can see that image but you, because it's in your head. In order to take that image and put it into some material form, you have to have a craft, a skill. Now, if you don't have these creative images, you can still have the craft and the skill, and you can produce up to a certain level. You know, if you have the great creative images in your head, but you don't have the skills,
Mhm.
you can't express
Right.
your artistic
Mhm.
concept.
Mhm. Yeah.
You gotta have the craft, whether you're a painter or a sculptor or a wood carver or anything. You have to have the ability to take the image and make it into something. It has to be deliberate, it has to be premeditated. Accidents are things turn out accidentally gorgeous, pretty, but they're not art because they're not a conscious, premeditated expression of your thought. And now this is a very classical,
Mhm.
you know, academy definition or thought.
Yeah, because some of the words that I've seen, I've written them down, describing the two. Seems to me as in some cases it's a crossover. Okay, for example, in art, ideas, feelings, visual qualities, emotions. Okay, for crafts, hands, brain, tools, technique. And yet I can see moving words over from one
Well,
category
you
to the
can't
other.
express art,
Exactly.
you can't express creativity unless you as a painter, you have to know perspective, you have to know color, you have to know all these concepts. Even how to mix your paint, you know.
Hmm.
There's loads and loads of things that are not creative that the creative person has to have in order to express this creativity. And without them, by accident, you might get something nice.
Yeah. Um, the other day, I watched a video of Peter Bacchus, who was one of the great later half of the 20th century potters, sensational potter, who did a piece that was rather large. And to me, it started off as, let me say, a craft, okay? And then evolved into art. Okay. So I think a lot of these definitions you can take and you can throw out the window, okay? Unless you don't progress from step one to step two.
But he has his craft, and then using his craft, he then expresses his creativity.
Right. Where he turns it practically into sculpture.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Peter Bacchus, it was a curious thing. He came back from World War II, and he was a big guy, big. And he knew nothing about pottery except when he looked in books and he saw pictures. And he had no idea about the size of the pieces. And the piece was, that was the photograph in the picture. And it actually was that tall, but he had no idea it was that tall. So he made it that tall.
Right.
Why not?
Absolutely.
He had the strength, he had the ability, and he did it.
Yeah.
I always tell the kids, I can't teach you creativity. I can teach you the skills, and if you have the creativity, you'll be able to express that creativity. Without the skills, you can't express the creativity.
Right. Yes.
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 And I think, unfortunately, too many people really just, whatever they do is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not.
No.
And whatever they do is art, because anything that I do is art.
Yeah.
And that's not so.
When you see a piece of pottery in a gallery or museum, or even in a store window, what is it about it that catches your eye? Is it is it the form? Is it the glaze? What is it about the piece?
I think it's the form. No, I should have brought down another piece. I have another tall vase, also carved up. If you look at the line, it's a beautiful line. The other piece, there's a subtle bump somewheres in here, and your eye is pulled right to that bump. And no matter how beautiful the piece is, it's ugly, because and the decoration on a piece sometimes is very important. Sometimes it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the shape of the piece is what's important.
Right.
Yeah. There was a guy here in New Paltz who's dead now, but he did pottery with the most marvelous glazes. I mean, they look like sunsets.
Mm-hmm.
The transition between the blue to the gold to the dark, the oranges, and it was just absolutely exquisite. The shape of the pieces were adequate.
Mm-hmm.
They were well thrown, light, but the thing that really made them great was the decoration.
Yeah. I
Some,
think. Yeah.
Sometimes the shape is what counts.
Yeah.
Sometimes the decoration is what counts.
I think we've got enough for another discussion at a future date. But thank you, Lionel, for a very enlightening discussion. And perhaps you've encouraged some of our woodland ponders to consider getting some clay under their fingernails. It's an exciting thought.
Oh, and I'll tell you, it really is fun.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh. So there.